In 2020, the Kansas City Chiefs won Super Bowl 54, 50 years after claiming their first Super Bowl title, in the last year of existence of the old American Football League. I mentioned this because of the 8 teams that came over to the NFL from the AFL via the merger. The new league's 2 prominent teams were the ones that appeared in 3 of the 4 Super Bowls between the 2 leagues, the Chiefs and the Oakland Raiders. So in this very first edition of the T3 Raider Roots podcast, I think it's only fitting that we go back 50 years and take a look at how this rivalry truly became a hate-filled, bitter rivalry among players and fans alike. In order to understand the Raiders, one must truly understand the image and how it was crafted and spun. So sit back and listen as I take you back to the year 1970. Somehow it always seems to come down to Kansas City and Oakland, as God only follows those 2 teams. This comment came from San Francisco sports writer Wells Twombly before the Chiefs and Raiders squared off against each other in a game on November 1st, 1970. Twombly went on to say that games are not life and death struggles, they're entertainment. But perhaps even he, in his statement, was underestimating the impact that this one game played in Kansas City's Municipal Stadium would have on both teams, as well as the home cities of these 2 teams, who were already linked professionally in the sports world. The Chiefs came into the game not only as the defending AFL champions, but also the defending Super Bowl champs, having defeated the Minnesota Vikings in Super Bowl IV just months earlier. The Chiefs had made it to the Super Bowl despite not even having won their own division during the regular season. That title belonged to the rival Oakland Raiders, who had beaten the Chiefs twice during the 1969 regular season. But in its final year of existence, the AFL had brought in a wild card playoff game, which allowed the Chiefs into the postseason. From there, the Chiefs beat Oakland 17-7 to earn the very last AFL title and a berth in the Super Bowl, their second in 4 years. So while Kansas City went to New Orleans to play in the big game, many fans and players in the East Bay seethed in disappointment. Legendary Raiders center Jim Otto said quite bluntly, "I don't like Kansas City. We never liked them." The feelings of disdain were pretty mutual, and not only between the Chiefs and the Raiders, but between the cities of Oakland and Kansas City as well. 3 years earlier, Oakland had lured away Kansas City's Major League Baseball team, the A's, short for Athletics. Charles O. Finley had been trying to escape Kansas City after buying the A's. He once even threatened to move the team into a cow pasture in rural Missouri. So when the American League finally permitted Finley to move his team to the West Coast, the feelings in Kansas City were summed up by a shot that's been attributed to both Kansas City sports writer Joe McGuff and U.S. Senator Stuart Symington of Missouri. The comment was that Oakland is the luckiest city since Hiroshima. By contrast, in 1970, Oakland was on the rise. The baseball team, longtime losers, had a new lease on life in their new home, and with a group of talented young players, they started to win. 1 year before they were to win the World Series title, they had won more games than they had ever done in the history of the franchise. Meanwhile, the Raiders had been professional football's winningest team over the previous 3 years, led by Al Davis. Even though they lost the 1969 AFL championship game to Kansas City, the Raiders had beaten Kansas City 7 of the previous 9 times heading into the 1970 season. The Raiders and A's shared the same stadium in what one Oakland civic leader had proudly called the greatest sports complex in the world. The Oakland Alameda County Coliseum complex had opened in 1966 and featured both an outdoor stadium for football and baseball and an adjacent indoor arena for basketball and hockey. The California Golden Seals of the NHL played there for a short time, and the Warriors of the NBA were to become longtime tenants and would bring several titles to the East Bay over the years. Oakland International Airport was close by, and Oakland was rapidly transforming itself into one of the world's busiest ports. For the local Chamber of Commerce, Oakland was emerging as the West's most imaginative city of the 70s, according to the Oakland Tribune. Now, during this same period, Kansas City was also experiencing growth. Kansas City had a new air terminal, the Kansas City International Airport, built just northwest of the downtown area, and it was intended to be the dominating air terminal of Mid-America. Construction projects were popping up, perhaps none more important than the development of a major sports complex in Kansas City's east side. It featured separate football and baseball stadiums for the newly crowned champions of professional football and the city's new Major League Baseball team, the Royals. The victory by the Chiefs in Super Bowl IV served as vindication for Lamar Hunt, the owner of the Kansas City Chiefs and one of the prominent architects of the American Football League back in 1960. When the Chiefs and Packers squared off against each other in the Pro Football Championship in 1967, the term Super Bowl was later first coined by Lamar Hunt himself. Vince Lombardi's Packers easily defeated the upstarts from the AFL. In fact, Lombardi even told the media that Kansas City was not as good as NFL teams. Now in 1970, Lamar Hunt, who has just helped orchestrate the merger between the AFL and NFL, was the one holding the Super Bowl trophy. And his coach, the loquacious Hank Stram, who unbeknownst to his team wore a microphone throughout the entire game, was being hailed as a visionary for this new brand of football that was part precision and part orchestral movement. As developing cities, both Kansas City and Oakland had much to look forward to, but they had respective problems as well. Oakland had long lived in the dark shadows of its sister city just across the bay. The differences between San Francisco and Oakland were stark. Wells Twombly said that the situation is almost laughable. San Francisco is a painted beauty, cooing and beckoning seductively. Oakland is a blue-collar worker with stubble on its chin, beer on its breath, and a hard hat on its head. When Holiday magazine had profiled the Bay Area in 1970, it called San Francisco the American city that fascinates nearly everyone for all the obvious reasons, while Oakland was viewed as a desultory and drab in contrast. Later, the magazine quoted Gertrude Stein with a moniker for the city where she grew up, and referring to the city of Oakland, she said, "There's no there." Kansas City, positioned in the middle of the country, had been buried by a New York Times profile that viewed it as a cow town and referred to KC as Hicktown, USA, the butt of 1,000 bad jokes. In fact, when the 7-story skyscraper was completed, the paper even went so far as to quote a song from the musical Oklahoma that everything's up to date in Kansas City. They've gone about as far as they can go. So despite their collective sports team successes, Kansas City and Oakland were linked in a feeling of being viewed as second-class citizens, and they ended up taking it out on each other. Now, as Kansas City and Oakland prepared to square off in 1970, the teams were coping with their own worries, even as their respective cities were dealing with racial tension, unemployment, police brutality, political struggles, economic woes, and other things as well. Both the Chiefs and Raiders had not performed up to their expectations. For the first time in recent memory, they would play a game where neither team was in first place. Bay Area sports writer Glenn Dickey commented that it could be all over if the Raiders lost to the Chiefs because of the difficulty of Oakland's remaining schedule. The Kansas City Star, meanwhile, said that a loss Sunday would put the Chiefs in a desperate position. This was to be an epic matchup between two proud yet struggling teams. The game kicked off in Kansas City's aging municipal stadium, which was shared by the Chiefs and Royals, while the new sports complex is still being constructed. With baseball season already over, temporary stands have been erected across the outfield, and both teams' benches were on the same side of the field. More than 51,000 fans crammed into the stadium, and the game was nationally televised on NBC. The on-field struggle was low-scoring and very tight. The halftime score was 7-7. Oakland had taken the initial lead on a Darryl LaMonica touchdown pass to Raymond Chester. Kansas City had tied the score, but was hampered all day by penalties. Some have classified games between the Chiefs as more of an upheaval of nature than a sporting event. This contest was no different, but it would end up tearing the lid off an already steaming pot. After the Raiders took another lead at 14-7, the Chiefs closed the gap with a Jan Stenerud field goal, and the score was now 14-10. Late in the game, the Chiefs took the lead on a Lynn Dawson to Otis Taylor pass play that Oakland argued Taylor had committed offensive pass interference during the play. This was not the first time the Raiders had complained about Taylor. In the AFL Championship game the previous year, Taylor had caught a long third down pass from Dawson to move the Chiefs out of the shadows of their own goal line. But the Raiders believed, and some video evidence seemed to corroborate, that Taylor had actually caught the ball out of bounds. So the play should have probably been ruled as an incomplete pass. Later in the drive, the Raiders were hit with a pass interference penalty while trying to guard Taylor, which set the Chiefs up for a go-ahead score. Again, the Raiders complained that it was Taylor that was doing the pushing. Now, almost a year later, With only 5.5 minutes left in a critical contest, Kansas City was back on top. When the Raiders got the ball back, they couldn't do anything. So the Chiefs got the ball in the lead and with the chance to run out the clock. Facing a 3rd and 12 at the Oakland 48 with just a little more than a minute left to play, Len Dawson called his own number. He bootlegged to the right, which nobody expected from a 35-year-old quarterback who was just returning from a knee injury. Dawson had faked the handoff to his left, and when he returned to his right with the ball, there was nobody in front of him. He gained 19 yards, then fell to the ground at the Oakland 29, securing the first down in a Chiefs win, which would move Kansas City ahead of Oakland into a first-place tie. And then, from out of nowhere, Big Ben Davidson of the Raiders came diving in and drove his helmet into Dawson's back as he flipped over the top of the quarterback who was already on the ground. Davidson would later claim that he wasn't sure at the time whether or not Dawson was actually down. A nearby official immediately threw a flag, but just as Davidson was getting to his feet, in came the Chiefs' Otis Taylor. Oakland radio announcer Bill King had the call, which was later immortalized on NFL films. Here's Big Ben Davidson being jumped on by one of the Chiefs. 2 more Chiefs come in. There's a big pileup. Davidson and Taylor are going at it. There are at least 8 Chiefs. Here come all the Raiders. Holy Toledo. It's a free-for-all. After about 5 minutes of trying to restore order and sorting things out, the 15-yard penalty was marked off against the Raiders, moving the ball to the Oakland 14. Raiders linebacker Dan Connors, who'd lost his helmet and been bloody during the brawl, argued that since Taylor had been involved in the fight and been ejected from the game, Kansas City should also receive a penalty. After more deliberation, the referee finally ruled that there were offsetting penalties, wiping out the entire play. So Dawson's first down never happened, and the victory that would have propelled Kansas City into first place was just still hanging by a thread. There was even more confusion in that no one seemed to remember where the original line of scrimmage was. A call went up to the television booth, and the ball was eventually placed at the 49, 1 yard behind where the ball should have been placed. The Chiefs ended up having to punt, and Oakland had one more chance. The Raiders quickly drove into Kansas City territory, but when a Raider ball carrier could not get out of bounds and stop the clock, it looked as if the game would end. But a Chiefs injury forced a clock stoppage. So the oldest player in the league, 43-year-old George Blanda, lined up for a game-tying field goal attempt. The Chiefs placed 6'10" Morris Stroud right into the crossbar. He was instructed to jump up and try to swat the ball away if it was really close. As the entire crowd watched the kick and the game was held in the balance, Stroud jumped and just barely missed knocking the ball away before it cleared the crossbar. One of the Kansas City reporters later commented that even if Stroud had successfully knocked the ball away, the Chiefs probably would have been called for goaltending in view of the way their day was going. After having kicked the game-tying field goal with just 3 seconds left in the contest, the Kansas City team and its fans melted down completely. The Chiefs were called for back-to-back unsportsmanlike conduct penalties that moved the ball all the way to the Chiefs' 30 for the kickoff. The Raiders attempted an onside kick, but Kansas City recovered, thus ending the game. Debris rained down onto the field. Raiders players were jumped on, and one of the officials was even tackled by an angry fan. Sanity, however, prevailed as numerous spectators came together to form a protective corridor through which the players and officials could escape the bedlam. Chiefs coach Hank Stram stormed after the officials into their dressing room and unleashed a furious verbal tirade, what one witness described as a flood of phonetics, some indiscernible, most unprintable. The game became an instant media sensation. The next day, Ed Levitt of the Oakland Tribune wrote, "After Sunday's spectacular show on national TV, the Raiders and Chiefs are the hottest topic going from coast to coast." People began to take sides. One Los Angeles sports columnist said that Davidson's piling on was so vicious, so irresponsible, so dangerous, and so unnecessary that those who respect fair play should be sending Taylor a medal. And even though Taylor's retaliation in defense of his quarterback probably ended up costing the Chiefs a victory, Taylor received nothing but praise and accolades from teammates and fans alike. The Kansas City Star was overrun with calls and letters complaining about the officiating crew. The newspaper ended up publishing the address of the NFL office in New York, where fans then directed their rage. The bad blood between the two teams was spilling all over the place, continually hyped by the media. This was the early climax of a very long and bloody battle. The rivalry between Oakland and Kansas City is unique in that it encompasses both football and baseball. while also involving two cities, smaller in stature, neither of which had any professional sports teams prior to the mid 1950s. I felt the pinnacle of this rivalry was a good place to start in talking about the Oakland Raiders. As I attempt to trace back to the early roots of the franchise and make my way forward with the Raiders as they leave California and head for Las Vegas, we will highlight some of the important people and seminal moments in Raiders history. For this episode, I'd like to credit Matthew Ehrlich in his fabulous book, Kansas City versus Oakland, the bitter sports rivalry that defined an era. Join me next time as I step all the way back to the year 1960 for the birth of a new league, the American Football League, an idea and a dream that would grow and would merge, and from out of that idea would come a team from Oakland. And that's where we'll set our boots on the ground and start the journey that will bring us through the hallowed museum that is the history of the Raider Nation. And I will end this show like I will end all my shows with a reminder that the Raider Nation is all about passion. And as I always say, passion always outlives fashion. This is T3 wishing you a bright silver moon shining in the dark black night.